Okay, well, hey everybody. This is just going to be me for a solo video, but the thought occurred to me the other day that we had done a video on the Hello World activity for STEMcoding.osu.edu, which again, this website is the website that we use to implement STEM coding activities into actual classes. And there's some advantages that this site has over just using the editor from the p5.js group. Then the advantage is that you can more easily kind of check that your students have completed various activities that you assign to them. And so really the advantage is for the teacher more than for the student. But there's some quirks to this framework. It's almost a learning management system. There's some quirks to it. And the Hello World activity, which you should watch before doing this one, explains some of those quirks. And this is kind of part 2, and this is troubleshooting. And so this is incredibly important that you don't skip this activity because at some point the code is not going to do what you expect. And in this framework, it is a little bit tricky to figure out what those error messages are and to try to figure out what's going on, okay? And so that's what this troubleshooting activity is going to help with. So the 2 quotes that I have to open up this thing is, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? Which is the opener to A Tale of Two Cities. And what that is supposed to mean is that sometimes when you're debugging, you know, the code, it's very satisfying to be able to solve a bug in your code. And so in a certain sense, it's the best of times where you can solve a bug. But on another level, it's the worst of times when you have a bug in the code. But another important saying is fortune favors the brave. So you should be brave and be bold and don't give up until you figure out what those bugs are. Okay? So fortune favors the brave. Don't give up. Hang in there through the thick and the thin. All right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the Hello World code. And so this is kind of related to the Hello World from before. So I'm going to open it up in Editor. And if I scroll down, you can see it. It says Hello World, sure enough. Come on, buddy. There you go, Hello World. And I'm going to edit this lab file group. Now, if you watch the Hello World video, you know that you do not just immediately jump into editing this code. You can run it, and that's fine. As it talks about in Hello World, you got to make sure that your pop-ups are unblocked, which is relatively easy to do in most browsers, but in Safari it can kind of give you some trouble. So I can run the code, but before I submit the code, before I edit the code, the first thing I want to do is I want to save the project. That's the key thing from Hello World is I'm going to save the project. I'm going to just call this Troubleshooting version 1. I think you have to put something in the description. I can't remember. But anyway, I'm going to put something there. These are the 2 files that I'm saving. I'm going to save this project. So there we go. And then what you do is you want to try to open it up from the project menu, which you can get to the project menu by clicking this thing up here, your saved projects. And then down here, and then you want to click that little arrow there. And it's going to give you the option to open or delete it, right? So you can kind of see that open button. You want to click open. And now you're good to go. Now there's only 3 options here instead of 4. You don't want to submit it until a little later. And again, you want to submit it from the project menu. Is the best way to do it. Again, that's not super user-friendly. I'm trying to make it more user-friendly, but that's what it's doing right now. That's how you would make absolute sure that the submissions go to your teacher like it should. So this, again, is the code. And so what we have is we have 2 numbers for the position of Hello World. And so the X position is a little bit left of the middle of the screen. All right, so it's 0.35 times the width instead of 0.5. The height is right in the middle, right? Height divided by 2, that's going to be right in the middle. And so that's why it says Hello World right in the middle there. I like having kind of a gray background so you can kind of see the edges of this thing. But there we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to sabotage this thing, all right? And we're gonna mess with this code until it doesn't work, and then we're going to try to find the bugs. And this is a really important thing to do because if you sabotage the code, you know what's wrong with it. You can fix it immediately. But in practice, when you're actually doing a real exercise, you're not going to know where the problem is. And so this activity is designed to help you figure out where those problems are and how to interpret the error messages and things like that. Okay, so let's sabotage it. So what's the first thing we're going to do to sabotage it? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to, this x hello thing, we're going to sabotage it by changing x underscore hello to x hello, okay? And so when we do that, I'm going to delete this here, and then I'm going to click Run Code. And nothing is happening. This is what I call the white screen of death. Sometimes you don't even get this gray boundary. Sometimes it's just straight white. And so when your students get to this point, they're going to be very confused. And the problem here is that sometimes there will be warning messages over here. Like, so say, for example, I delete this semicolon. It'll say, hey, dude, you should probably put a semicolon there, right? If I delete this parentheses, it's going to say, parentheses maybe? Okay, got it. But if I misspell a variable, it's not going to do anything for me here, okay? And so this troubleshooting activity, it's about all the ways you can mess up the code and not have this editor tell you that you did something wrong. It turns out for this language, JavaScript, it always assumes that you are spelling the variables correctly, whether or not that has any basis in reality to it at all, right? And I do this all the time. We just recorded the gravity video. One of the variables was misspelled. In one of the earlier takes of that. Happens all the time, all right? But in this framework, it's not going to give you any kind of an error. So how do you figure out how do you figure out what to do? Well, it turns out that this editor can give you warning messages and errors and things like that. But there's another place that you can go to see what those errors are, okay? And so the place you can go is kind of described here, and it's called the web console. So any kind of JavaScript code will write any kind of error messages to the web console. So this step 3, we have videos for how to find the web console in Chrome, how to find the web console in Firefox, and also how to find the web console in Safari. So right now I'm running Firefox, and in Firefox it's actually fairly easy to find the web console. There's more than one way to do it, so I'm going to go to my white screen of death here. So here's my white screen of death. And to find the console, I'm going to hit F12, like that. And that immediately brings me to the web console. Okay? And then in the web console, it says reference error. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'm going to make it bigger here. It says X hello is not defined. And so immediately I get a useful error message. It says X hello is not defined. There's a variable that's not defined. If it's not defined, it's probably because I misspelled it. I never set it to some value. Okay, sometimes it's because you're using a variable that you didn't initialize at the beginning. That's also possible. But in any case, it gives me an idea of what's wrong. And so very quickly I can go in here and stick that back into there. I can run the code. Sure enough, it's going to run again. Okay? So there you go. Now, the other way of getting the web console, so again, with Firefox, you can hit F12, and boom, it'll come up right away. Easy peasy, all right? The other way you can do it, let me see, you go to Web Developer, Web Console. That's another way to get it in Firefox. Yeah, I can also go here, click Web Developer. By the way, you guys are all web developers now that you do the STEMcoding project. click Web Console, there it is again. So there's a couple different ways of seeing it in Firefox. Again, the easiest one is to click F12 to have it come up. Now in Chrome, I have a weird way that I open up Google Chrome because I'm a weirdo. In Chrome, you would find the Web Console by clicking here in the top right, and then under More Tools, under More Tools, you want to click on Developer Tools. Then once you click there, then you get to the console. So there's the console, right? Now I could have done that. You can also do that with F12 as well. You might need to click on the word console sometimes. Okay. So that's how you do it in Chrome. I can't show you Firefox now because I'm on a Linux machine, or I can't show you Safari now because I'm on a Linux machine. But that's how you would do it. So that's a very, 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 very important thing to know how to be able to do. And it is a little bit tricky. We're trying to figure out a way of writing these console messages down here eventually. But until that day comes, you're going to have to hit F12. By the way, F12 is not how you get it in Safari. There's something else you have to do. There's a couple of things you have to click. So if you just watch that video for Safari, you can see the various clicks that you have to do to get it to work. I don't know what to do about Edge browser. It should work. It should also work in Edge browser. But all right. So we sabotaged X-Hello, and then we fixed it. So now it's working again. Let's sabotage something else. Okay. So I'm going to go over here, and the next thing to sabotage is that instead of sabotaging a variable name, we're going to sabotage a function name. And there's a function called text size, which determines the size of the text. So for example, if I make this bigger, it'll make hello world bigger. So there's your hello world. It's even bigger than it was. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sabotage this thing. Instead of capital S size, I'm going to make it lowercase s. And so now I can run the code. And again, I have the white screen of death. Okay? And as I was saying, there's no error here. There's no warning. There's no anything. Again, JavaScript is assuming that you know what you're doing with variable names and you know what you're doing with function names. Now, why is it so tolerant of those things? You can ask a computer scientist, and they can tell you. But this is just what we have to deal with. So what do we do to find the web console? You guys remember? Well, F12 is the trick. And it's going to tell us text size is not defined. Okay? It probably thinks that this is, it might think that this is a variable instead of a function now. I'm not sure. But in any case, it tells us right away the thing that is wrong in the code. And so we can go back and we can adjust that. All right, put the S back in there. Make sure it works again. All right, there we go. Hello world. Again, it's a little bigger because I went and I increased that number. So I'm going to close these things. All right. So that sabotage attempt was again thwarted by the web console. Another way to do this, another way to sabotage the code that will not produce a warning in this editor is if you accidentally create a function. So in the code we have this sort of 0.35 times the width. So what we can do is that instead of just multiplying it by a number, we can call this number xfrac, which is the fraction of the width that the exposition of hello is. And so I can go ahead and rewrite this in such a way that it says xfrac here. And I can run it, should still work, should still be fine. So there's your hello world. So far, so good. But what can often happen is that, so you know how in math classes sometimes there's so many things that are multiplied together we don't even show the the little multiply symbol. So if instead of xfracs times the width, as you can see here, if instead of this, if I was going to rewrite this as that, like obviously this should still work, right? So I hit play or run or whatever, like still works just fine, right? Here's the problem, is that if you get rid of this symbol, which is, the multiply, the asterisk there. So you have this. According to a math class, this should work, right? Because the multiply is implied. Not so with the computer program. Okay, so if I hit run code here, and by the way, there's no warning message that's popped up here. There's nothing red. There's no little I. There's nothing along those lines. So again, this editor is assuming that you know what you're doing. It is, and so if I hit run code, again I have the white screen of death. Okay, and so if I hit F12, it will tell me xfrac is not a function. Okay, so what it's doing is that when I write it this way, it thinks that I have a function that I've defined, and I'm trying to pass this number to that function. Is what it thinks it's doing. It is what it thinks that I'm trying to do. In reality, I'm just trying to multiply these numbers together, right? And so, for example, there's one of the activities, the planetoids with the spring. I have the students do something like f spring equals minus k x minus x blob, because that's what the equation looks like. A lot of them will forget to put a multiply symbol here. And the program will run that. It will think that there's a function called k that I'm trying to pass an argument to. And so that's just not going to work. And so this troubleshooting activity is supposed to give people kind of a heads up to try to avoid doing this, and doing this. But the nice part is that the web console, what fools this web editor does not fool the web console. And so the web console will give you some useful information to figure out what went wrong, and you can go ahead and unsabotage your code and make sure everything works fine. That works fine now. Okay? So there you go. I feel like there's another way we can fool this thing. So I accidentally created a function. Okay, if statements. All right. So here is yet another way in which we can create a kind of white screen of death. Well, here's another way that we can screw up the code without throwing up an error in the editor, which is that if I take this and I go over here, so I did Control-C to copy that. I'm going to paste that into here. Okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and erase this line like that. Now, the problem with this code, and so this code is, if 0 is greater than 1. 0 is never greater than 1, right? That's totally not true. This is false, okay? So since 0 is never greater than 1, this code is never going to get run, right? And if this code is never going to get run, then xfrac is never defined, okay? So when I press run code, I'm going to get a white screen of death. And it's going to be really weird because there's no warning message here. This editor is not smart enough to realize that this variable has not actually been initialized. And so this too will give you the white screen of death. But again, if you go to the web console, it'll say xfrac is not defined, and you can kind of stare at this thing and say, all right, well, no, but I did define it. And that's true, you did define it, but you put it in an if statement that's not always run. So and in this case, it's never run. So one solution to this is potentially to change this to 1 is greater than 0, which is always true, and so that way xfrac does get defined. But if you're using an if statement, there's probably a reason that you want to use that you're using an if statement. Maybe you're checking if two things are collided or something like that. So this is not always going to work, right? In a certain sense, having 1 greater than 0 makes this pointless. So the solution to this, which is kind of discussed down here, the solution to this is to add a global variable. And so if all we do is, if we go up here and we add a variable up here, xfrac equals 0. So now if we run the code, we have defined xfrac. So if I run the code here, it's going to produce hello world, but hello world's going to be all the way over here because x is 0. X hello is 0 instead of like 0.35 times the width. So that's the right way to do it. Okay, you want to initialize your variables at the beginning, set them to value, set them to various values. You don't want this to be the first time that the variables appear in your program. So that's one way to fix things. Now the last thing that we want to do, that I want to show you guys, is it actually will produce an error in this editor. But it's very important to think about how this happens. Okay, so let's say that I accidentally deleted this curly bracket, which happens all the time. It's so easy to delete curly brackets in this thing; it's almost crazy. Here's the thing to notice. So again, I've sabotaged the code here. I am producing a warning and an error here, but here's the thing: is that there's a red X there. What does that say? Say unmatched curly bracket. There's a warning down here, unrecoverable syntax error. But there's nothing at this line in particular. And so what this means is that if you accidentally delete a curly bracket, the code is not going to be smart enough to be able to tell you that line 12 is where a curly bracket should be. For the most part, it assumes that you know what you're doing with the curly brackets. And so what really happens here is that there's a curly bracket here, there's a curly bracket here, and then this curly bracket is kind of closed, and it's smart enough to track it back to here, but it's not smart enough to realize that, oh, there should have been a curly bracket there, because it doesn't really know where the curly bracket is supposed to be. So that's the thing to bear in mind, is that when you have curly bracket errors, this editor can tell you if you have a curly bracket error, but it can't tell you exactly where. And so it's usually going to be sort of downstream from wherever this error is, or maybe upstream from wherever this thing is. Okay? So bear that in mind. And this is a good exercise because here you know exactly where the curly bracket was supposed to be, but maybe in the code, maybe you can't remember. The other advice that you can do whenever you're encountering curly bracket errors is just use Control-Z. Just do an undo. Control-Z, here we go, Control-Z, undo, there we go, we fixed it. Okay? And maybe you even want to do multiple Control-Zs. Maybe you want to keep on hitting it to undo a couple of the things that you did, especially if you erased more than one curly bracket. But anyway, suffice it to say that when things go wrong with the code, either it is a misspelled variable or it's a missing curly bracket. And I would say that the most difficult things to solve are often the missing curly brackets. But both of those things can derail your program pretty good. And if all else fails, you can always just start over again. You can sort of start from the beginning, take the modifications you made for the code and put them in one by one, line by line, paying very close attention to sort of when does the thing fail, when do you get the white screen, what's the first time you get the white screen of death. That's another way to kind of figure these things out and try to pinpoint exactly what went wrong. But yeah, that's about it. So happy bug finding. Best of times, worst of times there. Hang in there. You will get better at this. Everything takes practice. I've been doing this for a very long time, and so the way I can breeze through these things is because of just the experience I've had. But once upon a time, I was in your guys' shoes, figuring out bugs in the code. My whole high school science project, I tried to use C programming. I kept getting bugs in my code. I gave up on C programming after a while because I just couldn't figure out how to debug these things. And so this is going to be the hard part of what you're doing. If you can just get through this, it's going to be smoother sailing further down the line. So hang in there, and yeah, thanks for watching.